Good afternoon. We greet everyone with Old New Year, with Melanka and all our Vasils and Vasilievich. And also I would like to greet Oleksiy Matsuka. He is today 35 and he decided to celebrate his birthday in a friendly circle, so you can provide him with a present. I would like to wish Oleksiy that next year we will celebrate his birthday in the freed Donetsk, and we are ready to go there. Thank you. So we wanted to present results of all Ukrainian survey concerning the situation in Donbas, how people assess the situation, and the measures that can help or those that create obstacles. And then we will continue our discussion, the discussion on the law on reintegration of Donbas, and we will try to discuss what we like about this law, what we don't like about this law, and this discussion, I hope, will be really interesting. Now I give the floor to Iryna Bekeshkina. She is going to present the results of the survey carried out in December. It ended on the 19th of December, and it was carried out in all the regions of Ukraine, except those regions that are occupied. So I will try to be brief. From time to time, we carry out such surveys. We repeat the same questions. So what is the sense of this? So we believe that this year there will be negotiations with Russia, and the rhetoric of Putin provides us with such hope, and maybe they will try to provide Donbas to us as a Trojan horse, and some things are not acceptable for Ukraine, and I explained it to our foreign partners, and we should say that the public opinion was rather stable in many instances. Only a small part, 18%, and we had the same figure last year, they believe that the peace in Donbas can be established by force, and this is a stable figure. And the majority believes that there should be a compromise in establishing the peace. 49% believe that there can be some compromises, but not all the compromises. And when we present a list of the compromises, out of those compromises that are fixed in the Minsk agreements, citizens do not agree with many of them. They do not agree to carry out the elections there. This is 20%. So first, Russia wants to carry out the elections, and everything else. And also, people do not agree for full amnesty. Only 16% agree for this, and formation of local militia and governmental bodies only 17%, and special relations only 20%. And what divides the regions is the law of Ukraine on non-aligned status of Ukraine, and the East and the South want to have non-aligned status. They believe that this will help Ukraine to have good relations with Russia. And this time we also launched one more question, and it reminds this issue to some extent. What decisions of Ukrainian power can help or create obstacles in peaceful regulation in Donbas? So what is acceptable for me, and what can objectively help or create obstacles in the peaceful process? And here, the division of between the regions is really big. The reinforcement of sanctions of the EU and the United States, the majority of population believe that this will help the process of settlement in Donbas, reinforcement of armed forces, and this and the introduction of temporary administration of UNO and peacekeeping forces for the time of withdrawal of Russian forces and the disarmament of the militants. And this is the main issue in the regulation of this conflict. What divides the regions? There are such questions that really divide the regions. So this is lethal weapons from the United States. So some people regard it as a positive thing, but in Donbas and in the south, people are afraid that this will provoke military actions. I don't believe that the voice of people is the voice of God, but we should take this opinion into account. So restoration of social payments in Donbas. The proposal to cut off these territories, this idea is not popular among Ukrainian society. And our previous surveys, they recorded that many people are against this. And we see that this will help to restore the relationship with the region. And we asked the citizens if the president is provided with all the responsibilities concerning the armed forces and the National Guard, only 9% support this idea. And maybe this is connected with the problems of regulation in Donbas and fears that some power, especially military power, will be in one hand. So also what divides? So when we asked about overall amnesty, people were against. And when we said about the adoption of law on amnesty to simple people, people believe that this will help peaceful settlement, and the issue of amnesty is an acute issue. From one side, people do not like it, but at the same time, what should we do with those 35,000 people who had arms in their hands? So this issue will raise big discussion in the society, and also the non-aligned status, and this issue divides the population. And we see that there are big regional differences, and this point of opinion exists, and also the stop of blockade with the occupied territories. 41% believe that this will help peaceful settlement, and 29% believe that it will create obstacles. So the conclusion is like this, that the society should have broad discussion of these issues, and the law that is now being adopted, this is a framework law. It doesn't envisage some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 measures. These measures should be discussed publicly with participation of the public, and if something is proposed, it should be properly discussed in order to provide people with the information, in order that people understood the necessity of some measures and whether they will help or create obstacles in conflict settlement in Donbas. So if you have questions, please ask.
The questions will be at the end of the discussion. Let's pay attention to one distinctive feature, especially journalists. One thing when we ask people, are you ready or you are not ready to compromises, to some specific compromises, we get more negative answers. And when we ask whose step should it be, will this step be acceptable? Will it promote peace creation? Now I'm giving the floor to Vostok-SOS representative Oleksandra Dvoretska. They had a Tunyan meeting. They had discussion there as to the wording of the law. Good afternoon. I would like very much that the legislative initiatives are built on the findings of sociological researchers, opinion polls, but not just on voluntary wishes to have some more powers by some bureaucrats. I would like to say that I do not agree that this year would be the year of Donbas return as a Trojan horse. I do not think Donbas is a Trojan horse. I think we will have negotiations, and the profile legislation would contribute to the start of the discussion inside of the Ukrainian society if we have the procedure of its voting form. We have now the draft law 7163. It would be voted in the second reading on 16th tomorrow. Tomorrow the voting will be held, and NGOs and experts are for returning this draft law to the repeated second reading, and our remarks concerns the statements not concern the statements of declaring Russia as an aggressor, but we are against some details that the powers should be wider, but but we should also provide the mechanism how to respond to the violations on the part of law enforcement officers and prosecutors' offices, staff as well. And at the same time, in the new draft law, there are many indefinite terms. They need definitions, such as areas to which the law will be applicable. If we understand the areas which will be deemed occupied, we understand it, but what measures would be applied to which wide powers would be provided to law enforcement officers, and also what is the safety zone, this is not understandable, but the bill quite understandably gives access, give only limited access to mass media, to journalists, to NGO staff, because this is due to the risk jeopardizing the civil rights, and this could hamper civil humanitarian situation, and this will also hamper reintegration of the territories. For more than half a year, this draft law was named as reintegration law, but it does not contain any plan of reintegration, so it is important to speak how it is titled. It is about specifics of the state policy and ensuring of Ukrainian state power in the territories which are not controlled by the Ukrainian government, which are occupied. And this draft law has less positive but more negative features, but this legislative initiative was initiative of the President of Ukraine, and the first draft law was much better than this wording which we have upon refining, because now it includes wishes of various factions representatives, and it is rather controversial inside because the wishes differ. If it, as the voting would be tomorrow, we call on the deputies to return it to the second repeated reading, so that it has a declarative idea that these territories are occupied, but no liberties, no civil rights could be limited there. During the conflict with the occupied territories. Miss Oleksandra, I have one question. I would like to repeat it now. I have asked you at the press conference that for several years many politicians and experts and also civil society demanded marital law to be launched. And according to this law, maybe the situation is subject to marital law. How to resolve this issue? This draft law does not give a clear answer to many questions, but from its final provisions we can understand that we are talking about the end of the ATO, anti-terroristic operation, but we are talking about some new regime, but it would not be marital law. It would not be subject to the marital law legislation because the marital law concerns responsibility of the state for civilians, and also it should include positive actions towards civilians so that their rights are established and maintained. Now we are talking about access to the territories, and it would be the same as as it is under marital law, but as concerns elections, we will have some other kind of regime. I think this is not honest, this is not and this concerns manipulations which are made possible. As concerns anti-terroristic operation, it was not enforced by law, so it could be cancelled by the President of Ukraine, but not by the law. But our opinion of how the situation could be could develop, but nobody would introduce marital law today. According to this draft law, I am giving the floor to Oleksandr Kliuzhev, an electrician of Громадская OPORA NGO. And Miss Alexandra said that we need the second repeated reading. Do you think this could be corrected, and is it possible to correct it during the discussion? Thank you for your question. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I think that MPs of Ukraine should continue refining this draft law. I think personally it is rather rough in such important questions which concerns development of situation in Lugansk and Donetsk regions. We can't allow some rules to be introduced which would be distorted some other way and which would work not the way which President of Parliament supposed them to work. So there are some risks, they are political and risk of as concerns political risks, positive political forces. There are counter arguments and also deep concerns as concerns Constitution of Ukraine. This is critical in terms of legitimacy. If those political forces in general would think that some subjects got the powers which are wider than it is supposed by the law, it would be appealed against by various forces, and the effect of it would disappear. If we look at the developments of political situation, there are calls on not to allow giving the president unconstitutional powers. We hear, and this would be growing, and this draft law should contribute to the territorial integrity of the country, and also it should contribute to the consolidation. And there are risks in the draft law which would quite vice versa destabilize the situation. So this bill is focused on regulating the rights and obligations of citizens of Ukraine. This is a big problem of this interstate conflict of Ukraine, because there are many nuances which should be regulated by law, as the Constitution establishes, but they remain unresolved because bureaucrats change their positions depending on the political situation, starting with the regime of crossing the contact line. And in this draft law, as lawyers say, general conditions should be set forth. The law declares this, but still the Cabinet of Ministers is responsible for setting such regime of crossing the contact line. But it is important for us to prevent violations and abuses. So if we look on the situation with IDP, the most critical remarks of lawyers, including international law NGOs, specific individuals, specific civil servants, they change the rules which are based on the Constitution. I am also concerned about the situation with the potential limitation of liberties of individuals, citizens of Ukraine. The state plans in Article 10 of this draft law without declaring martial law to limit the liberties of citizens of Ukraine. We see here the attempt in a fast manner to introduce new terminology and use limitation of rights and liberties of individuals. We can't accept this argumentation that there are circumstances to limit the rights and liberties of individuals, but yes, this should be done, but based on the Constitution. This special law is deemed to correct the constitutional norms, and I do not like this. This would not be, people would not like this also. If we correspond these limitations to the Constitution, everyone wants to live in peaceful conditions and have predictable life in terms of constitutional rights and liberties, and some people would be living according to special procedure which is not supported by the Constitution, where there are no mechanisms of control and prevention of violations. So we declare by this law that some people in Lugansk and Donetsk regions would live in such conditions of limited liberties in the territories not controlled by the state. Universal approach should be applicable to everyone. If we have martial law launched, then this law should concern all the territories of the country. People in whatever region they live according to the law and according to the Constitution, and they can forecast, they can predict their life. And now for some territories, not specified procedures to be established. For example, forced alienation of property of individuals is possible, but then these people will get compensation. This is allowed only according to martial law. But in this law we also hear such declarations. Compensations are payable only if this piece of property was destroyed. The lawyers should specify all these procedures on case-by-case basis, because we have an aggressive neighboring country, and everything should be applicable generally, but not to specific groups of people. Deputies could do this now in the whole. If we look into the remarks to this law, I think it is unrealistic to do. The MPs will not be able to do that during voting to correct all the problems in this law. Indeed, there are many critical remarks, and they seem very reasonable, and they concern prevention of the destabilizing law to be introduced. I am giving the floor to Oleksiy Matsuha. He is celebrating his birthday today, but we would like to give him the floor. As to the findings of previous experts, I would like to say to the journalists who, when you will be writing about this draft law, it is on the website of Verkhovna Rada from December 19th, so use this version so that you understand what provisions we concern. We see that the first days of January we are talking about very political important political sense, which would underlie peaceful situation both in Ukraine and Donbas and in the world in general, because Donbas is an object from which political parties try to get dividends, try to communicate to their voters, speculating on the topic of what is happening in the east of Ukraine. This is the main reason why more than 137, about 700 remarks from MPs, half of them were discarded by the committee and by the Secretariat of Verkhovna Rada, and this demonstrates the importance of this topic. It is as important as NATO topic or Ukrainian-Russian relations topic, Eurasian topic. This is a negative trend in Ukrainian internal political life, because in fact this attitude when Donbas is tightly Trojan horse, that people there, they are to be blamed, they're guilty themselves. This would only help and support those statements of the Russian Federation that Ukraine has a civil war inside of the country. In my opinion, as a person who is involved in coverage of this situation for 4 years, before that I also had been working in Donetsk region, although I'm not a politician or a lawyer or I think that we should divide these two tracks about declaration of Russian Federation's participation in this conflict. They should be declared in the law, or inside Ukraine the role of Russia should be declared. You see that southern and eastern regions of Ukraine, many Ukrainian citizens think that we have not friendly but possible for communication relations with Russian Federation, and also profile ministry on occupied territories should be renamed into the Ministry on Reintegration issues. They should be given the plan of implementation of this policy of reintegration. It has a long title. It was adopted 1 year ago on January 11th, 2017. Now we audited the plan and we can say that 100% of it has not been completed. The bureaucrats say they have completed up to 30% of the plan's measures, and there is no system of evaluation. There are no criteria. How can we evaluate the progress of reintegration of Lugansk and Donetsk into national life of Ukraine? How many school children entered higher educational institutions who are from these occupied territories? How many persons addressed hospitals who are from uncontrolled territories? How many people got their welfare benefits, their retirement benefits? We do not have such statistical data. The Minsk group tried to discuss these issues, but everything very politicized even there, because representatives of separate areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, they believe that due to their ideological orientation, they can influence practical sense. So, for example, restoration of Vodafone mobile telecommunications in Donetsk region, and to this end we do not need the law, we need only high quality of work, and we should add just new items to this plan. You can see at Donetsk Information Institute, our NGO website, all information about this plan and its implementation. I think that the civil rights are compromised in Ukraine. We believe that Pavlo Zhebrevsky, who is the head of Donetsk region, as well as the head of Lugansk region, they do not publish the expenditures, and you know that the website was hacked. So the individual who try to understand what is happening in the internal relations in this region, the person can't use this data from this website. I do not know what will be the developments with the local policy by local self-governments in those regions after this law, because they were nivelated by the military administrations, which will be introduced then, and it would not be controllable. It would be uncontrolled by civil society, because it would be military administration. Donbas is not a Trojan horse. It sounds insulting for us, for people from that region. It is just the ordinary region of Ukraine. When you see that if you have a Donetsk registration in your passport, because you live in Donetsk, according to your registered address in your passport, it does not contribute to reintegration, because people are separated in those who live in the controlled territories and those who live in the territories not controlled by the state. As concerns Ukrainian focus of what is happening in historical context and practical measures and agreements on practical sense, which are happening both on controlled and non-controlled territories, these measures they should be multiple. They should number millions of those measures focused on reintegration. So we invite anti-corruption activists to watch over and to audit what is happening at local administrations and also in military units.
Before giving the floor to Dmitry, I would like to say that this plan, as of 11th of January last year, if it is implemented at least 50%, that would be fantastic result. This is a framework law, and there was escalation near Avdiivka, there was nationalization and a blockade and introduction of passports on that side. So many things changed. The situation is different. So we cannot address the issues only taking into account abstract truth. I also was checked against this database. Please do not simplify this issue. This is a real issue for people who live in non-controlled territories, and each person who travels there, for example, if I have this Donetsk registration, so I undergo special check. So if you are from Donetsk, so they just try to verify whether you are a terrorist. So if I travel from abroad, they do the same. But have you seen those facilities? There is dirt. People are waiting for 4 hours in summer and in winter in bad weather conditions. So That's why it is important that people understand in what conditions people live. From one side, there are terrorists, and from the other side, there is discriminatory control, and people from non-controlled territories feel this. So I would like to reconcile the participants. So there should be checks, the similar checks for Oleksiy and Oleksiy Matsuka at these checkpoints. And when I said about the use of universal procedures, I included this issue there. So concerning terror threat, the registration doesn't matter. We understand that if there are bad intentions, so registration of Pokrovskoye, registration in Kyiv won't matter. So there should be proper single unified standard. So
шляхом дотичний до реалізації безпекового режиму.
And the safety regime, how it is, what are attitudes of civil society to it, of local civilians to it. Ordinary people didn't see any measures on reintegration, and also attitudes about reintegration efforts of the state. They are comprised from this lack of measures indeed. So our task to make the year of 2018 the year of discussion, which should be wide and efficient. This draft law, although it is imperfect, it should be seen in the context whether we have some systemic policy in the state which would unite the society and offer conceptual approaches to reintegration. We need the policy of reintegration at some territories, as this law say, and at the same time, the policy of improving confidence to Ukrainian state in only Donetsk and Lugansk regions, but I don't think so. We need such policy for all regions of Ukraine. This draft law would not contribute to the reintegration because the only value of it is a declaration of the status of the Russian Federation. That's all. In the issue should be what the question should be what we could do so that deputies repeatedly, upon refinement, hear this law. It only harmonizes the situation as it is, and just streamline what we inherited upon the anti-terroristic operation, but it does not provide any recipes of reintegration. So I do not think we can say that this is law about reintegration of Donbas. It is its official title because the trends of our governmental borders is to catch some modern terms. We have Donbas, we have painful problem of Donbas, and some governmental bodies just try to become popular, to catch the hub with distorting the provisions of this law. And we agree that there is very little value in terms of reintegration in this draft law. So your proposal, what would you propose to the deputies? Whether they can correct it in the hall in Verkhovna Rada? In legal terms, it has not been voted, and even remarks have not been voted for, and MPs, they do not have those remarks in hands. We do not know whether all corrections are available on the website. We can't talk about its legal value until we, along with the governmental bodies, would articulate the way of reintegration policy, the orientation of it. Of course, it would only become the very large load on this way. Reintegration issue can't be regulated by laws. It would be regulated by correlation of political forces of Russia, Ukraine. Now we have time for the round of questions and answers. Please ask your questions. Good afternoon, Zik News Agency. There was a thesis about throwing horse to Ukraine in the format of Donbas. Who is saying so? Who, as it was me who told us, I wrote about this many times. Trojan horse are the conditions on which Russia wants to return Donbas to Ukraine, its occupied territories. Only in this sense, like Trojan horse, with the elections based on the conditions of local authorities, with forming law enforcement bodies, militia, of local representatives with total amnesty and special status of those regions which should be fixed, set forth in the constitution. This was what I told about Trojan horse. It was about conditions, but not about people, not about territories, which should be returned as a part of Ukraine. Olga Komarova, Freedom, Radio Liberty. Can you list specifically the powers which are named in this draft law, those of law enforcement officers, militaries, which give rise to concerns? If you want to look into details, I would like to consult you to read 29 pages of the legal department of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. They provided their opinion and they criticize this because it contradicts the constitution of Ukraine. As concerns the powers of the president, the constitution set forth an exhaustive list of powers of the president as concerns also using the military forces without consent from the parliament, and also recognition of occupied territories because the boundaries which are set forth by the president, this is unconstitutional. As concerns law enforcement officers, as told, this is creation of some zones of safety which are also not fixed in the law, where law enforcement bodies and their staff. In general sense of the word, the draft law supposes that they are all bodies which are involved in the anti-terroristic operation, all bodies of the Ministry of Interior and also frontier guards, and also prosecutors' offices' powers will be widened because they do not have general control. It was one of the demands of the experts, but this general control would be returned on these separate territories of Ukraine. They are unconstitutional, those provisions, and they are again the principle of division of powers between the branches of power in Ukraine. Why the situation is dangerous with the wide powers of the president? Maybe some people may say it is acceptable that this special situation demand from us special steps, but the precedents demonstrate, they prove that when some situations in history happened where presidents went out of the boundaries of their powers, out of the limits, and the use of troops in delineation of territories occupied, and also start and end of the measures to rebuff the Russian aggression. And there are other risks I told about. Political forces, when they got this, they would be saying, talking about usurpation of power, and the situation would be destabilized. However, the law is intended on stabilization, but we see that some provisions of it may destabilize the situation, so we should return this law into the constitutional framework by refining it. There are constitutional provisions, and the legislative acts are harmonized with the constitution. I mean provisions on anti-terroristic operation and so on. While this draft law, it is, it may, Anna Miranyuk, Ukraine channel, question to Oleksiy Haran. Tell us, please, talking about the draft law as it is now, its last version, what do you think about its international aspect, whether it does not contradict Minsk Accords? I think, as concerns political goals, declared recognition of Russia as an aggressor, and also recognition of territories as occupied ones. This means only to recognize the situation as it is in reality. What Russia will be saying, this is their affairs. There are no contradictions. Yes, we recognize that the territory is temporarily occupied, so we do not control the situation in these territories. And this concerns legal collisions and whether we will have some protests in terms of its constitutionality, we will see, and whether it contradicts Minsk Accords. I do not see contradictions with the Minsk Accords. We have civil-military administrations. We should say what experts are talking about. The regime should be strictly regulated. This is important, and not only for negotiators in Normandy format or workers. And this would be important for international right advocacy organizations. They will pay attention to this. The main question, what would be with Mariupol, for example? We would not have mayor or local authorities. Would some military administrator will be under the flag of this or in some other city in Donetsk region where people live their peaceful lives thanks to deterrence of aggression. The law gives conditions for unstable democracy in those places where we have civil society organizations and activists and the achievements of open society. We should look in detail, more meticulously on this. As concerns negotiations, I think we should look at this not as on the global process when from Russia or other people are saying us or trying to say us everything is globalized. This is ruined. There is no white and black situation in Donbas. There are many trends inside. Of course, propaganda will feel it easier to say that the Donetsk People's Republic, so-called, if it holds elections, it violates the rules. But we should divide the trends. Otherwise, we become hostages of propaganda models some way, to some extent. Thank you for your question. It is very important. We forgot to discuss it. What is the difference between Ukrainian position and Russian stand, and also the stance of those illegal formations in Donetsk and Lugansk regions? The constitution, we base on constitution, and the other side it argues based on reasonability and principles and so on. That is why I am critical about this draft law. If on some portion of the territory some provisions are established which basis is doubtful and seems not constitutional. If in Drushkivka and Kramatorsk the rights, civil rights of people are uncontrollably limited, then we will lose the portion of our argumentation, which is based on constitution, on rights and liberties, and unified principles applicable to everyone. So deputies didn't think about this, about our stance in the negotiations about peacemaking. When our side come and saying about standards of elections, then we are blamed in unregulated CEC rules.
Maybe this is not popular, but international responsibility of Russian Federation for its aggression against Ukraine. This responsibility will be established by the International Criminal Code, and it's not enough just to put this norm in our legislation. We need the facts. We should collect and analyze them. We should ask those people who suffered, who saw this Russian presence, and we should do this, and we should continue to do this. And we see that documenting is not sufficient, and there is no proper legislation about the missing persons in the zone of conflict, about the civilians who suffered in the result of the conflict, and people who were wounded by some fragments. They are registered as those who got the injuries in the result of some household events. So we should have proper national legislation, and we should also address international institutions. So we thank our organizers for the time provided to us. So no questions, okay. I would like to thank everyone, and we would like to say once again that those critical arguments we voiced here concerning this draft law, we do not direct it to the main ideas of this draft law, the idea of recognizing Russia as an aggressor, and also there should be headquarters established that would control the anti-terror operation. We know that de facto SBU does so many things should change, and at the same time we had serious arguments concerning constitutionality of some provisions concerning citizens' rights and the need for their clarification. And politicians and the deputies should take these things into account. So we thank everyone for being with us, and we once again congratulate our colleague. Thank you.